I'm Jeannie Bimisa. I'll discussing 6.8.1 Skill Integration Challenge, Planning Subnet and Configuring IP Addresses. Learning Objectives. IP Subnet Planning. Practice your subnetting skill. Build the network. Connect devices with Ethernet and serial cable. Configure the network. Apply your subnetting scheme to serve PCs and router interface, configure services and static routing. Test the network. Using ping trace wave traffic inspect tool. Background. You have been asked to implement the standard lab topology, but with a new IP addressing scheme, you will use many of the skills you have learned to this point of the course. Task 1. IP subnet planning. You have been given an IP address block of 192.168.23.0 over 24. You must provide for existing network as well as your future growth. Subnet assign are assuming IP subnet 0 is enabled. First subnet existing standard student LAN of 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 router R2 central up to 60 hosts. Second subnet future student LAN up to 28 hosts. Third subnet existing ISP LAN up to 12 hosts. Fourth subnet future ISP LAN up to 6 hosts. Fifth subnet existing one point-to-point link. Sixth subnet future one point-to-point link. Seventh subnet future one point-to-point link. Interface IP addresses. For the server, configure the second highest usable IP address on the existing ISP LAN subnet. For R1-ISP to ISP, if a 0 over 0 interface, configure the highest usable IP address on the existing ISP LAN subnet. For R1-ISP, SO 0 over 0 interface, configure the highest usable address on the existing one subnet. For R2, the central's SO 0 over 0 interface, use the lowest usable address on the existing one subnet. For R2 central's FA 0 over 0 interface, use the highest usable address on the existing student LAN subnet. For host 1A and 1B, use the first two IP addresses, two lowest usable addresses on the existing student LAN subnet. Additional configuration. For PCs 1A and 1B, in additional to IP address default gateway configuration, configure them to use DNS services. For the server, in addition to IP and default gateway configuration, enable DNS services, use the domain name eagleserver.example.com and enable HTTP services. For R1-ISP router serial interface, you will need to set the clock rate, a timing mechanism required on the DCE end of serial length to 64000. No clock rate is needed on the DTE side. In this case, R2, the central serial interface. Task 2. Finish building the network and packet tracer. Add cable wire missing. Connect a serial DC2 cable to R1-ISP SO over 0 with other end to R2 central SO over 0. Connect PC 1A to the first pass Ethernet port and switch S1 the central. Connect PC 1B to second pass Ethernet port on switch S1 the central. Connect interface FA 0 over 0, 0 on router R2 central at the highest pass Ethernet port on switch S1 central. Connect interface FA 0 over 0 on router R1 ISP to Eagle Dash server. For all devices Make sure the power is on to the device and the interfaces. Task 3. Configure the network. You'll need to configure the server, both router and the two PCs. You will not need to configure the switch, nor do you need to iOS CLI to configure the routers. Part of the router configuration has already been done for you. All you must do is configure the static router and the interface via the GUI. Use 6400 as a clock rate of the serial length. The static route on R1-ISP should point to the existing student LAN subnet via R2 central serial interface IP address. The static route on R2 central should be default static route which point via R1-ISP serial interface IP address. These procedures were explained in the Chapter 5 Skill Integration Challenge. Task 4. Test the network. Verify your work using feedback from the Check Result button and the Assessment Item tab. Use ping, trace, wave traffic, and the Inspect tool to examine the network. Trace packet flow in the simulation mode, which HTTP, DNS, TCP, UDP, and ICMP viewable in the event list filter. Use simulation to test your understanding of how the network is operating. Reflection. Reflect upon how you have learned so far. Practicing IP subnetting skill and networking building, configuration, and testing skill will serve you throughout your networking courses.